As a child, I probably never dreamed about having a 911. It's not a car other than maybe the 930 Whaletail that you have as a poster on your wall. At least not, relative to Lamborghinis and Ferraris, it's not the poster car. And a lot of people could say they all look the same from generation to generation. So you get a little bit of vanilla there, and people aren't as impressed by those or don't necessarily dream of them as much as an quote unquote exotic car. But being in the high end car business for a while, I always joked with people that the more I drove, I can't even remember my own saying now. The more I drove Ferraris, the more I liked Porsches, because you learned their quirks, and it was a kind of meet your hero scenario where once you take it off the wall and actually get into it and deal with the service costs and the poor leather quality and the dash shrinkage and the sticky buttons and all sorts of things that go along with it, the engine out timing belt services, as opposed to a 911 that you just get in and drive. And not just that, a 911 that you can get in and drive and go to the racetrack and then turn a bunch of laps, beat the snot out of it, and then stop at the grocery store on your way home, and then take on a weekend trip. Like, they just go and go and go, and they take the abuse. So I wanted to build my own outlaw. So the phrase outlaw Porsche has become ubiquitous. You might blame Magnus Walker for that, but really, they were around long before him. A group of people called R Group, which is a very exclusive group of people. It's spelled RGRUPPE. And it's started in Southern California. It's guys with outlaw Porsches. I mean, basically, it's a hot rod. But they've kind of coined their own term for a hot rod build 911 or any other Porsche. Guys do it with 356s. Rod Emery would be a great example of, that would be like the bougie outlaw, but it's something that's not stock, that's, modified and built to somebody's own taste. So I looked around for a few years, and I had purchased a really, really clean Carrera 3.2, black with burgundy interior. Burgundy's my color. I thought, man, this will be a good one to build. But the values had kind of started rising. This was in 2014, and the car was worth like 45 grand. One, I didn't have the budget to cut apart a car like that, and two, I didn't have the heart. The car was too good. So I said, I got to find a really ratty one. So I sold that one, made money, and was looking for a kind of crappy 911 that I could afford to cut apart. And it came in the form of Matt, who was my detailer at the time, shop manager, whatever you want to call it. And he grew up across the street from a guy who had an old 911 SC in his garage. And he was a farmer. His dad was a farmer. I mean, not the stereotypical guy you would ever expect to have a Porsche in their garage. Overalls, I mean, you can imagine just the piece of hay between his teeth, what teeth he had remaining. That's not really the picture of him, but he looked like a farmer, and he was a farmer. But anyway, he had a house across the street from my detailer, and Matt knew that there was this 911 that had been sitting in the garage for just about as long as he had been alive. His dream was, when he grew up, he wanted to buy that car. Well, unfortunately for him, the car became available before he was in a position to buy it. He had just started working for me. He was making pennies, and he was interning. He was like 19, so he called me frantically, and he goes, hey, my neighbor's selling his 911. You got to come by. He's selling it for 10 grand. Now, 10 years ago, that wasn't that big of a deal, but this was 2015, which was kind of the previous peak of the air-cooled 911s, and that was a smoking deal for almost any condition 911. Unfortunately, I was 2 hours away, and I was just like, Matt, you got to stall him. I'll be there. Like, I'll stop at the bank. I will be there with 10 grand cash, but I cannot get there for 2 hours. Do whatever you have to do. And he said, well, there's a problem. Somehow another dealer found out that he was selling it, and Marshall Goldman, which is a big time exotic car dealer in my town. Everybody should know who they are. They're probably the largest exotic car dealer in the United States. They had sent one of their sales guys over to try to buy it. And I said, well, they know a good deal when they see one. I'm going to be too late. So in that quick of a phone conversation, I had found and lost the ultimate cheap 911 that I could afford to build into my project. So Matt calls me back a little bit later and he said, well, I guess you're in luck because the guy who came over, they must have sent like the wrong sales guy, because his tactic to try to buy the car was to insult it and put it down. And he told the guy, yeah, we're going to have to put a turbo on this car to sell it. So I'll give you $7,000. So I went over, looked at the car. It was old man tan, but it had lobster interior with sport seats, kind of a cool interior. It had definitely been sitting forever. The tires were just about falling apart, and I put a boost box on it and it fired right up. Again, the beauty of Porsches, you can do that with old Porsches. You do that with an old Ferrari, you might snap the timing belt. I agreed to buy it off him, although there was a little back and forth on the negotiations because he said he wanted 10, but then he called me and said, well, what do you think the car's worth? Don't make me play that. I want the car for $10,000. He's like, well, you know, what do you think I can get for it? I'm like, I'm not your car consultant right now. This deal is strictly in my interests. You're not a client. This is my dream car for my dream build. I got to get it as cheap as I can. So we ended up meeting smack in the middle, to steal an Ed Bullion phrase, at $10,500. So I took the cash over to him, bought the car, towed it out of there, and I was happy. So we spent a little bit of money just like flushing the fuel system, getting it running just enough to kind of evaluate it and see how bad of a shape it was in. It needed everything. Like, it needed a full restoration. It had been repainted a couple times before. It ran, but terribly. The suspension was aged. The interior was pretty nice, but other than that, it needed everything, which was great because I was going to do everything anyway. So I figured, well, I can either spend 60 to 80K on a restoration to original spec and have like the world's most expensive SC at the time and never get my money back, or I can spend 60 to 80K on doing things the way I wanted and have my dream Outlaw 911 for less than $100,000, which, you know, will I get that money back either? Probably not, but I'll have my car. And it won't be a $150K build that started with a $50,000 pristine car. So we tore it apart, sold off the interior, sold off some other stuff of value to try to buy my cost down a little bit, and sent it to paint. We sent just the shell to paint while we worked on the other stuff, and I chose the color of Rosso Rubino, which is a Ferrari metallic burgundy, probably my favorite color of all time for a car. And also I wanted to mess with Porsche purists at shows like Luftkugel, and it worked great because, of course, I took it to Luftkugel, and guys were arguing about whether or not it was arena red or this red or that red or whatever, and I just stood around and did one of these and laughed because it was a Ferrari color. To make a long story short, which is rare for me, we had it painted. I had the sunroof deleted. I saved a lot of money on paint because a good friend of mine who used to work for Best of Show Automotive, which that entire dealership is a whole nother set of car stories in general. For anyone that's ever heard of the guy that ran that, go look it up. It's a FBI, all sorts of stuff. He had a paint booth in his backyard. He was retired, so he did the job for like $13,000 for me to paint the whole car and do it really well. He welded in the sunroof panel, so it's a, you know, slick top now. And we did elephant racing suspension, CCW wheels, upgraded brakes, totally rebuilt the engine and gearbox, put a limited slip differential in it, a lightweight flywheel, cam, upgraded the ignition system, lightweight carpet kit, RS door cards, deleted the air conditioning, SSI heat exchangers, M&K sport exhaust, short shifter, the whole works. Some nice burgundy interior touches to kind of complete the theme. And many thanks. I mean, there's so many people involved in building it, but my good buddy John Sabo had his guy do all the mechanicals and kind of manage the build. The tough part about it was that being in the car business, and there is a proverb about this, I don't remember what it is, but it's something like, you know, harvest your fields before you eat the corn or something like that. And so I was trying to stick to that, of not letting my personal project get in the way of client stuff. And so we had another 911 we had to rebuild the engine on for a client. That delayed my car for like 6 months. And so my car kept getting delayed because more important stuff was in front of it, stuff that made money to pay for the build. But after about 5 years, it was finally done. I had the front end all PPF'd and all, the rocker panels and all the impact areas because I wanted to be able to drive it and not be scared about the paint because I like driving my cars. The key for any of my cars is to come up with a great vanity plate. I had this one saved. I think I actually registered the car long before it was done just so I could get this plate. And it is Maroon 6 because I like a good play on words like any dad would. And of course, you all know the band Maroon 5. Well, this is a maroon colored flat 6, so it's Maroon 5 with a little bit of inflation. The first drive was nerve-wracking because you spend this much time on a build and you're like, what's going to break? What's wrong? What isn't done right? I mean, that's just how it is. Spent a summer finding all the stuff wrong with it, and there was some, and then put it up for storage, and then spent the next summer thinking I'm going to drive it. Nope, I did an idiot thing, and I had the rear deck lid off for refinishing the underside because some of the paint flaked. So we put gold foil insulation like the McLaren F1 engine bay in there. We had a cover, just a dust cover over the engine, and I was moving cars in a hurry, and I started the car, and it was like struggling to stay running. And I pulled it outside and then realized that it had sucked the dust cover into the fan. Thankfully, it did not suck it into the intake and into the engine, but it was still about $2,000 to make it right. Thought we were good, but then on the next drive out, the generator light came on and I was hearing some noise in the back. And we're on our way home from dinner, thankfully on our way home, because if it happened on the way, I would have been hangry and it would have been very, very bad for everybody involved. We're on our way home from dinner and the car just, fan seized up and shut down. Or sorry, the generator did, but the alternator is behind the fan. It's not like on a separate, belt system. So that shuts down the fan as well. So we're broken down on the side of the road, and this guy comes up, driving by, pulls in, and he turns around and he's just like, "Hey, is everything okay?" And I do not really hide my emotions well, so I'm just like, "No!" And so he comes back to help us, and he gets close and he goes, "Hey, I know you from..." And then he just immediately stopped, all respect to him, and he's like, "This is not the time or place to fanboy out," because I can tell Doug's pissed. So it was actually awesome because he lived 2 driveways down from where we broke down. So I got the car started again and just forced it to stay running just enough to drive it into his driveway. And he's like, "Hey man, I got a shop out back and tools. You want me to fix it?" I'm like, "Well, unless you have an alternator for a 911 SC, not going to fix it." So I called a tow truck, and I had recently got a membership to Haggerty Drivers Club. So I was like, well, I don't really want to use AAA for this. And I had called all my local tow truck drivers, and they were out on vacation, whatever, it was Saturday night. So they didn't want to be bothered. So I'm like, all right, I'll try this Haggerty Drivers Club. Maybe they'll be a notch above the AAA guys. The trucker shows up, and he had about as many holes in his shoe as he did in his mouth. But he was very nice. And I said, "Listen, this is my baby. We can't screw this up." "Oh yeah, no problem. I know what I'm doing." But not that guy. He's new. This is his first day. But don't worry, I'll be doing all the loading. And he continues to talk to me while the other guy, who's on his first day, starts to load my car. So I'm watching this whole thing go on. And of course I have an audience too, because my wife's there. Brandon, the guy with the 54 Ford who had rescued us, was there. His wife was there. And then my friend Tim Cantwell and his wife had driven by in their Ferrari, saw my car, turned around, and came back. So there's a whole audience for this whole debacle. They get to hooking it up, and they have too much angle with the cable. So they need me to roll the car forward. So the guy asked me, he goes, "Hey, can you take it out of gear and roll the car forward so we can winch it up?" So I reach in the car and take it out of gear, and it was on a little bit of a downslope, so it started rolling immediately. But what he meant when he asked me to take it out of gear was, can you take it out of gear at a to be determined future time that I specify So he freaked out because the car started rolling and puts all of his large mass on the headlight to stop it. And I just hear this. I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding. Sure enough, he split the headlight. And I just said, hey man, this is not going well. You're gonna leave. Thankfully, Tim Cantwell had an enclosed trailer and he lived like 10 minutes away. So he goes and gets his enclosed trailer, comes back, we load it up. It's like, I don't know, probably 10:30, 4 hours later by the time we get back to the shop and unload it, but the car's back safe and sound. I called Haggerty about the whole deal to file a claim. And that was an interesting scenario in and of itself because they said that they had no record of any service, like the tow truck never came essentially. I said, well, here's a picture of the tow truck. And then they lost the claim and this and that. And in deference to them, their service following up with it was pretty awesome. The vice president or head of that division, the roadside assistants, ended up calling me very quickly and said, here's, can I have your feedback? And, what can we do to sort this out and make things better in the future? So they obviously were concerned about getting better, but it certainly was not a great first impression for me. The good thing to come out of all that was this guy, Brandon, who rescued us on the side of the road and let us hang out in his driveway for 4 hours. This 54 pickup truck, I was like, man, this thing is amazing. He goes, yeah, I built it myself, which humbled me a little bit because here I am broken down in my 6-year build that I had paid other people to build, and he had done this in his backyard in a couple of years, and he was also out on a shakedown run, and everything was fine for him. But the paint work was amazing. I go, wow, this is great. He goes, yeah, I paint for a living. I said, okay, maybe we should use you. So it was a couple years ago. We've been using him ever since to do our paint work. He's an awesome guy, great business relationship. We sponsor his race team now, and it's turned into, a good friendship from that whole thing. But all that to say, cars, especially a build, is an adventure. It was definitely worth it in this case. I've had some builds that aren't. It's probably a never sell car. I enjoy driving it far more than cars that are worth way more. And it's a lot of fun because I can run it through the gears and still not be going too fast. I can drag race a Toyota Camry V6 and lose, but I have a grin from ear to ear because of the sound and the smell and the vibrations and the feel of the car. And it does everything that I wanted it to and everything that an outlaw Porsche should. And it's one of my favorite cars of all time.
When you get a ticket, no matter where it happens, it's more important than ever to fight every one. And the perfect partner in that fight is the Ticket Clinic. When you get a ticket, you're facing costly insurance premium increases, points on your license, fines, risk of suspension, jail time, and they can help you avoid all of that. They've got offices in Florida and in California, but they can help you fight a ticket through their network of attorneys no matter where in the United States you get one. You can text a picture of your ticket to 305-305, or you can check them out now at the link in the description below. So thank them for their support of VINwiki, of CarTrek, and fight your ticket with the Ticket Clinic.